When the heavy machinery of justice grinds into motion, we expect to see the careful weighing of severe transgressions. We anticipate high stakes, complex legal theory, and a courtroom hushed by the sheer gravity of the proceedings. Instead, the defendant in this particular docket is an orange tabby cat. The charge is malicious disruption of digital connectivity, specifically deliberately unplugging the household internet router during a crucial Zoom call. The prosecution's case rests on undeniable physical traces, a clear set of muddy paw prints leading directly away from the warm, humming electronics, compounded by the suspect's chilling, wide-eyed lack of remorse. We build these absurd, theatrical legal scenarios because they serve a very real human impulse. When someone or something crosses a minor boundary, we want an external authority to declare a winner so we can move on, completely bypassing the awkward friction of an actual confrontation. Behavioral researchers call this cognitive offloading. It is the natural urge to take small, taxing mental tasks, like settling a petty household grievance, and hand them over to an external tool or a third party to save our own psychological energy. But human arbitration has a massive built-in flaw. This line graph maps judicial parole approvals from a famous study by Danziger, Lavov, and Avnaim Peso. Notice how the approval rate plummets to near zero right before a scheduled lunch break, and spikes back up immediately after. Even highly trained judges are swayed by physical fatigue and hunger. Once you see how easily human judgment fractures under low blood sugar, the fantasy of an artificial judge becomes incredibly appealing. A machine never skips breakfast. It does not get tired, it does not get impatient with your tone of voice, and it carries zero personal investment in your domestic disputes. Yet, finding that flawless, neutral machine is deeply seductive, and assigning an algorithm actual judicial authority crosses a very sharp, dangerous line. Back in the courtroom of the tabby cat, the tension is peaking. A surprise witness, the downstairs neighbor's dog, takes the stand, introducing new circumstantial evidence, and the legal rhetoric reaches a fever pitch. But here is the trick behind this specific app, Tiny Court. The artificial intelligence generating that dramatic cross-examination has no power over the actual verdict. The language model is entirely restricted to writing the performance. This animated diagram shows how the system arrives at its ruling. The true verdict relies on deterministic Python code, computing a final outcome through an explicit scoring formula. Guilt is calculated by multiplying suspicion by 0.55, adding evidence weight at 0.25, and factoring in a petty severity baseline at 0.20. This structure isolates the suspicion from the actual proof. Persuasive AI rhetoric cannot override the hard math. By keeping the theatrical performance completely separate from the mathematical calculation, the code mimics the feeling of a trial. It gives users the psychological closure they want, without the system ever claiming genuine moral sovereignty. This split architecture aligns perfectly with two opposing concepts in human-computer interaction: algorithmic appreciation and algorithmic aversion. Studies show people readily embrace algorithmic appreciation, meaning they trust a machine's advice when a task looks repetitive or mathematically objective. Conversely, aversion kicks in fast, and people reject the algorithm entirely the moment a decision involves morality, deep context, or personal identity. Tiny Court avoids triggering that aversion by explicitly restricting its jurisdiction to harmless, low-stakes nonsense. The system openly refuses to process trauma, harm, or real legal disputes. The application works because users know they are asking the machine to organize a few facts and perform a comedic role. Nobody involved expects the code to dispense true philosophical justice. The gavel finally falls on our feline suspect. The deterministic math spits out a guilty verdict, though the sentence is immediately softened by an official plea for leniency, citing the cat's general lack of opposable thumbs. It is an amusing toy. But when you transplant these same algorithmic mechanics into actual institutional courts, the humor vanishes immediately. A landmark investigation by ProPublica into the Compass risk assessment tool revealed exactly what happens when real courtrooms adopt predictive software. These algorithmic tools inherited the supreme authority of the law without meeting the rigorous evidentiary standards that the law requires. If an app confidently outputs guilty based on high suspicion but incredibly weak evidence, that is a funny narrative mechanic for a pet. If a real legal system does the exact same thing to a human life, it is intolerable. When opaque algorithmic rules intersect with arbitrary risk scores and immense institutional power, the system strips away human context, actively harming vulnerable populations under the guise of objective math. This draws an absolute boundary for the technology. Artificial intelligence is never a valid substitute for human judgment when a decision involves punishment, physical safety, or human dignity. True judgment is an inherently human burden. It requires accountability. It requires an understanding of relationship repair, and it requires a person willing to bear the heavy weight of the consequences they impose. Offloading our judgment to a machine is appropriate only when the stakes are non-existent. It works when we are seeking comic distance and a little bit of emotional cooling for the trivial grievances of everyday life. Back in our apartment, the cat's trial wraps up by generating a harmless, neatly formatted paper artifact. The roommates share a laugh over the printed verdict, the tension dissolves, and the internet router is plugged back in. Right now, the greatest social utility for an AI judge is providing rigorous, theatrical due process for the pettiest crimes we can imagine.